In our headlines on this Monday afternoon, December 11th, here in South Korea. President Yoon Suk-yeol departs for the Netherlands today for a state visit that will seek stronger partnership on several fronts, including semiconductors, sustainable energy and high-tech industry. Meanwhile, Seoul's Finance and Economy Minister Chu Kyung-ho says a pan-governmental supply chain committee will be launched to ensure a steady and secure flow of key raw materials to prevent disruptions. Over in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Hamas militants should surrender as Israel's military operation marks the beginning of the end of the Palestinian militant group in Gaza. Ahead of President Yoon Suk-yeol's summit with Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte in the Netherlands this week, the country's ambassador to South Korea shared quite a bit of optimism regarding prospects of productive partnership in creatively tackling common concerns. Our senior presidential correspondent Oh Soo-young sat down with him.
Shared values will be at the core of South Korea and the Netherlands' evolving bilateral ties as they cooperate to build resilience against common global challenges. That's according to Peter van der Vliet, the Dutch ambassador to South Korea, ahead of President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit to the Netherlands this week. The two countries upgraded their ties to a strategic partnership last year, amid geopolitical and economic tensions in the Indo-Pacific region, where 60% of the world's maritime trade passes through.
We are both top 20 open and high-tech economies that share important values, maintaining a rules-based international order, freedom of navigation, democracy, and the peaceful resolution of conflicts. And these are not just nice-to-have values, they are in fact indispensable for our security and our well-being. So during President Yoon's state visit to the Netherlands, we will extend and broaden our relationship further, also into the political and into the security domain. For instance, by strengthening our bilateral defense cooperation and by working more closely together on issues of economic security and resilience.
As microchips are considered the lifeblood of core technologies that enable both economic and military prowess. Yoon told AFP in an interview published Sunday that Seoul plans to significantly boost semiconductor cooperation with major countries like the Netherlands, the United States and Japan. Not only would Yoon's visit enable stronger cooperation between world-leading chip equipment maker ASML and chip producers Samsung and SK Hynix, but van der Vliet says it would also foster links for broader innovation.
ASML is part of a larger Dutch semiconductor ecosystem with interests in Korea. And other Dutch equipment companies like ASM, which makes deposition equipment, and Besi, which makes packaging equipment, are also present in Korea. And the Netherlands is also providing chips for Korean electronics and automakers. So the Dutch semiconductor ecosystem also allows for many startups and small and medium-sized enterprises and knowledge institutes working on innovation and development of the semiconductor industry.
The two sides have also been holding exchanges in other areas crucial to economic security like batteries, hydrogen, smart agriculture and defence technology, according to the ambassador. Amid concerns of technology being misused and undermining societies, he further underscored the two democracies' shared interest in not only leading innovation, but also establishing multilateral dialogue and norms to address ethical, legal and security concerns, especially in the military domain.
For example, how can we ensure that artificial intelligence distinguishes between civilians and combatants? How does an AI program come to its conclusions? And for example, when targeting, and who is accountable for military decisions. And that is also why we hosted the first big international conference on this issue called reaffirm 2023, together with Korea. And that is why we are also very glad that the next summit, reaffirm 2024, will be here in Korea.
Going forward, the ambassador placed strategic importance on greater cultural exchanges in areas like film and visual arts.
South Koreans and the Dutch share a close affinity rooted in the essence of their small yet dynamic nations, and both countries heavily rely on human resources and a shared commitment to finding very innovative and creative solutions to all kinds of challenges. And Koreans and the Dutch are both, I think they're very creative people, and creative people find each other.
Following Yoon's bilateral talks with Prime Minister Mark Rutte on Wednesday, the two will sign deals on key areas of cooperation, likely to include semiconductors, green energy and people-to-people exchanges. Oh Seong, Arirang News.
Also on the diplomatic front this past weekend, Seoul actively sought to follow up on deals sealed with Washington during the President's state visit to the U.S. back in April, and those inked during the trilateral summit at Camp David later in August. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon has details.
As South Korea and the U.S. try to upgrade their technology cooperation and modernize the ROK-U.S. alliance into a more comprehensive one, the first next-generation critical and emerging technologies dialogue was held in Seoul on Saturday. It was chaired by the two countries' national security advisors, Cho Tae-yong and Jake Sullivan. This is a follow-up to President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit to the U.S. back in April.
At this meeting, the two countries discussed comprehensive cooperation measures in the semiconductors, quantum, bio batteries, and clean energy, and AI and digital fields. They also agreed to hold an informal tripartite dialogue between South Korea, the U.S., and India early next year.
Specifically, some agreements include exploring cooperative opportunities between their semiconductor technology centers and supporting joint research projects between South Korea's Ministry of Science and ICT and the U.S. National Science Foundation. Additionally, they committed to investing at least $10 million in collaborative research in the biosector. In the meantime, on the same day, 4 months after the trilateral summit at Camp David between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, Cho hosted Sullivan and Japan's Takeo Akiba to touch base on the spirit and principles of Camp David. Since the summit, North Korea has successfully launched a reconnaissance satellite into orbit, a key discussion topic between the three.
We reaffirmed North Korea's obligations to denuclearize and the prohibition of military cooperation under the UN Security Council resolutions on the North Korean issue. We also agreed to strengthen coordination among the three countries to ensure the thorough implementation of these obligations by the international community.
First and foremost, we've implemented our new commitment to consult with one another in response to regional threats, and we're increasing our trilateral defense cooperation, including sharing missile warning data in real time.
They also reaffirmed the importance of a resilient supply chain and economic security while addressing ongoing issues such as the war in Ukraine and issues in the Taiwan Strait. Cho and Akiba also used strong words to address the topic of fake news.
This was recognized as a challenge and threat to the fundamental matters of operating fair election processes in democratic countries and preserving the foundation of a free and democratic society.
In the meantime, to welcome the two advisors, President Yoon hosted them both at his residence for dinner. While showing gratitude, Sullivan said he visited Seoul while in college and had bulgogi, but could have never imagined having bulgogi with the South Korean president decades later. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
On the local front, Seoul's Economy and Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho sought to address the danger of dependence with regard to key raw materials earlier on this Monday. That being said, a pan-governmental supply chain committee will be set up, assigned with the task of ensuring a steady and secure flow. Our correspondent Lee Soo-jin reports.
South Korea is enhancing its supply chain management in response to rising concerns about its reliance on imports of certain raw materials. Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho held a meeting on Monday with related ministers where they discussed how to mitigate current and future supply chain risks.
Risks in the supply of items directly related to core industries and people's lives, such as urea, ammonium phosphate, and graphite, have recently been growing.
The government plans to establish a pan-governmental supply chain management committee by June next year that will oversee the creation and revisions to supply chain policies. During the second half of next year, the committee will also decide which raw materials and other economic items should be designated as essential economic goods. and the businesses that supply and produce these goods will receive government support for production and stock management. The government also plans to establish a supply chain stabilization fund with the Export-Import Bank of Korea sometime next year to provide financial support such as loans and investment for these businesses, with the size of the fund to be decided in the first half of next year. But the minister emphasized that a repeat of the urea shortage crisis in 2021 is unlikely.
Urea sales at gas stations were higher than usual immediately after the imports from China were halted, but the increase has been slowing since last week, and prices have largely been stable.
Prices of urea solution at gas stations on Thursday last week were around 1,602 won, or $1.20 per liter. That's within the regular national average price range of around $1 to $1.40. And around 96% of gas stations nationwide were confirmed to have supplies of urea solution. The government also announced that it has secured more than 4 months of urea, up from its previous 3-month supply thanks to recent contracts signed with countries other than China. 이수진, Arirang News.
Over in the UAE, this year's Global Climate Summit is poised to end tomorrow, that is Tuesday, but countries have yet to reach a consensus on phasing out fossil fuels. Our Shin Se-byuk explains.
At this year's annual UN Climate Summit, COP28, the crux of negotiations is the phased withdrawal of fossil fuel use. The conference is set to end on December 12th, but countries are clashing over the draft of adaptation goals. Some 80 countries have been able to reach consensus on the phasing out of all carbon-emitting fossil fuels. And the UAE, playing host this year, is rolling up its sleeves with high-ranking officials from attending countries to draw up an agreement.
It is our opportunity to deliver an outcome that is based on the science, led by the science, and equipped by the science.
This, however, is facing strong opposition led by some of the world's biggest carbon emitters, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and China. These countries claim that the conference should only focus on reducing climate pollution, not the fossil fuels causing it. OPEC also openly opposed the formalization of a phased withdrawal and reduction of fossil fuels and emphasized the need for a realistic approach to solving the climate crisis.
There is no single solution or path to achieve a sustainable energy future. We need realistic approaches to tackle emission.
This has prompted wide criticism of OPEC and oil companies, among those advocating for the cutting of carbon emissions by reducing carbon fuels.
OPEC and the oil companies right now are trying to whitewash the crisis that has been created by fossil fuels.
The International Energy Agency, in its report released on Sunday, said new pledges to be made at the climate summit are indeed positive, but will not be enough. The IEA said the world is still off track to meet climate targets to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, despite pledges made by dozens of countries. Climate activists symbolically releasing fluorescent substances into the Grand Canal in Venice, Italy, called for action on climate change. Meanwhile, Azerbaijan will host next year's event, COP29, on the back of support from Eastern European nations from November 11th to 22nd. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
Elsewhere in the Middle East, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Sunday called on Hamas militants to surrender, claiming Israel's military campaign against them is now marking the beginning of their end. Our Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Sunday called on Hamas to lay down their weapons and surrender, saying the Palestinian militant group's end is near. In the statement, Netanyahu said dozens of Hamas militants have surrendered over the past few days. However, Hamas has rejected the claims. Meanwhile, the Palestinian militant group says Israel will not be able to recover any of its hostages unless it engages in talks over conditional swap deals. A spokesperson for the Al-Qassam brigades said in a statement broadcast by Al Jazeera's television on Sunday that Israel will not be able to recover the captives by force, adding there had been a failed attempt by the Israeli military to free one of them. He also noted that Hamas fighters had partially or fully destroyed 180 Israeli personnel carriers, tanks, and bulldozers in the 10 days since fighting began after a brief 7-day ceasefire. The Israeli Prime Minister and Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke over the phone for nearly an hour on Sunday, with the Israeli leader reportedly expressing dissatisfaction with Moscow's stance in the armed conflict. Russia has regularly criticized Israel, including at the UN Security Council, while also hosting a Hamas delegation in late October for meetings. According to Russia's TASS news agency, Putin told Netanyahu that Moscow rejects terrorism but cannot support the dire situation of people in Gaza. Meanwhile, speaking to CNN, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says it's up to Israel and not the U.S. to decide when to end its war against Hamas in Gaza. The comments come as reports of Washington pressing on Israel to wrap up operations by the end of the year. In a show of support, Blinken defended the emergency sales of nearly 14,000 rounds of tank ammunition to Israel and called for a quick approval from Congress for more than $100 billion in aid for Israel, Ukraine, and other national security priorities. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In other news now, K-pop boy band ATEEZ has topped the Billboard 200 chart for the first time with its second album, that is. According to Billboard this past Sunday, the album, The World Episode Final Will, sold over 150,000 equivalent album units, mostly through traditional album sales. This latest feat sets a marker for smaller K-pop agencies in Korea, with the band's company KQ Entertainment becoming the first such firm outside the so-called Big Four to have a #1 album on the Billboard 200. The Billboard 200 chart ranks the most popular albums of the week in the US based on multi-metric consumption measured in equivalent album units. The 4 remaining members of boy band BTS are starting their military service this week. RM and V are enlisting today, that is Monday, while Jimin and Jungkook are doing so tomorrow, that is Tuesday. The 3 other members of the group, Jin, J-Hope and Suga, are already serving their country. Now, industry insiders believe all 7 members of BTS may be able to return to the K-pop stage as a group in the summer of 2025. Here in Korea, all able-bodied men are required to serve in the military for at least 18 months. Also, on the local entertainment front, 2 Korean streaming platforms have penned a memorandum of understanding to consolidate their entities to better compete with global streaming giants. Our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin has more on these efforts.
Are we about to witness the birth of Korea's largest streaming service? Local streaming giants Tving and Wavve have signed a memorandum of understanding for a merger. CJ ENM's Tving is the second largest domestic streaming platform with 5.1 million monthly active users. SK Square's Wavve is fourth with 4.23 million. When combined, their total of more than 9 million expected users would make them the leading domestic streaming service provider. The 2 rivals coming together was not a surprise. This marks the second merger between local streaming services following Tving's merger with KT's Seejin last December. Industry experts view this as a strategic move for survival.
With the rise of numerous streaming service brands, not only Netflix but also Disney+, there has been constant discussion about the crisis facing domestic services. The merger between Tving and Wavve is seen as a way to secure a competitive edge against industry leader Netflix.
In terms of numbers, the merged platform will fall short of Netflix's 11.3 million monthly active users. However, this could change in the long run.
This is exciting news for consumers because they can access a diverse range of content with a single subscription fee. Wavve has programs on terrestrial TV channels, while Tving has been building its lineup with entertainment shows and dramas on TVN. On top of that, each platform has its partnerships with streaming services abroad.
This move could also realize the long-envisioned dream of local streaming services: global expansion. Both companies already have the experience and know-how, with CJ E&M acquiring global production studio Endeavor Content and Wave America acquiring US-based video streaming platform Cocoa.
In the case of Netflix, subscriber numbers tend to peak when it releases an original series. This indicates that without compelling original content, a streaming service won't be able to compete globally. There's anticipation that through the merger, the combined investment capacity could increase, which could lead to more original content from the two platforms.
The two companies are expected to finalize a definitive agreement by the middle of next year to conclude the merger process by the end of 2024. 송유진, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at the latest news on the world now. In the U.S., tornadoes and strong thunderstorms across the state of Tennessee on Saturday has left at least 6 dead, dozens injured, while causing major infrastructural damages and power outages. Tennessee's capital, Nashville, suffered 3 deaths, while the city of Clarksville also saw 3 deaths, including a child. Clarksville Mayor Joe Pitts said on Sunday that 62 people have been hospitalized and hundreds of buildings had been made uninhabitable. The city declared a state of emergency, including a 9 p.m. curfew, which will remain until Sunday. As of Sunday afternoon, there were reportedly more than 50,000 people without power across the state. Tennessee officials' preliminary report stated that 13 tornadoes struck the state on Saturday. Imprisoned Nobel Peace Prize winner Narges Mohammadi had her prize accepted on her behalf on Sunday by her twin children at a ceremony in Norway's capital, Oslo. Mohammadi, an acclaimed Iranian activist, won this year's Peace Prize for her work fighting against the oppression of women and democracy. In a statement read by her 17-year-old children in Oslo, she said the Iranian people, with perseverance, will overcome repression and authoritarianism, and to have no doubt this is certain. The 51-year-old Mohammadi is currently serving a 10-year jail sentence in Tehran for spreading propaganda. She has been a prominent human rights figure in Iran for years and has been almost imprisoned continuously since 2010. Her husband, who is also a political activist, lives in Paris in exile with their 2 children. Japanese baseball sensation Shohei Ohtani has signed a record-breaking $700 million 10-year contract with the Los Angeles Dodgers. This is the biggest contract in team sports history and makes the U.S. Major League Baseball star one of the world's highest-earning athletes. The 29-year-old has twice been named American League MVP and is seen as one of the best baseball players in history. The Dodgers beat off fierce competition after Ohtani opted to leave his previous team, the Los Angeles Angels, upon expiration of his 6-year contract. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. After the jacket-free weekend we had, we are having a rainy start to mid-December. It's forecasted to rain all day nationwide and quite heavily for winter rain. East of Gangwon-do and mountainous regions in Jeju could see downpours into tomorrow morning, and rain could turn to snow in some of the areas. Meanwhile, the rest of the country will also receive rainstorms into tomorrow morning. Imagine if it was snow falling instead of those showers. That could have been a real headache. Temperatures will continue to be abnormally warm this week. We had a balmy start to the day, but highs are 5 to 7 degrees lower this afternoon in most places, topping out at 10 degrees here in the capital. Busan and Gwangju topping out at 16 degrees. Then another band of rain is in the forecast at the end of the week, and that will bring bone-chilling temperatures to the country this weekend, going down to minus 10 degrees Celsius on Sunday morning in the capital. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And those are the headlines at this hour here in Korea on this Monday. Coming up next is our daily panel session. Do stay with us.